to Pride Action Tank TV. I am your host today, Alaina Kennedy. I am the Manager of Health Equity at the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. The host who usually is here, Kim Hunt, cannot be here today, so I'm filling in, and this is my first time, so welcome. I am also here with my wonderful guest, Ed Yohnka? Yohnka. I do apologize for that. Thank you. And he is working at the ACLU. He's been there since June 1999.
Yes, probably before you were born.
No. So you started very young, probably when you were only 10 years old, right?
I wish.
Child prodigy. Ed goes around the state and has been all over. He actually just was at an interview recently, and so we're happy and blessed to have him here today. And we are here to talk about Title IX, a groundbreaking and historic piece of legislation that passed many moons ago. Now, this one was before I was born, I will admit. But right now, there's been a lot of questions about where it hangs in the balance and what does it mean moving forward after the Trump administration has removed a guidance as of just 2 weeks ago, right?
Right.
Wonderful. So, to set it up, and what is Title IX? It states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be defied by the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So, can you describe a little bit more the objective of Title IX statute and how it became law?
Sure. So Title IX is actually one of the most successful civil rights measures in the history of the United States and certainly in the history of education law. What it sought to do for the very first time was really bring balance to programs that schools and public schools, and especially those public schools who get federal funds, which turns out to be every public school nowadays, and many private schools, to bring balance between men and women in terms of the kinds of activities that are available. One of the issues, for example, I think one of the ways we most often think about it is in the context of sports. So that if you offer a male sport, you have to offer a female sport that's sort of a companion. And it's really expanded opportunities for young women and girls all across the country to participate in sports and other school activities, and has been incredibly successful over the last nearly 5 decades now.
Which is amazing. But how does it apply to transgender students?
So, Title IX protects against gender discrimination. And one of the things that we know about this is that oftentimes people who are transgender are discriminated against on the basis of their gender. Right. I think, as we often say, a transgender girl is a girl. First and foremost, they're not a transgender girl. They're not a girl who was born X. They are a girl. And one of the places in which we've seen, I think, a significant amount of activity in this area is that when a school district, for example, denies a transgender student the use of appropriate facilities, the use of appropriate names or nouns or other access or use of other things, there really is a form of discrimination, and that is really that's in violation of Title IX. So one of the things that has been most in play over the last few years is that in a case in suburban Chicago in the Palatine District 211 school system, the Office of Civil Rights for the U.S. Department of Education ruled that to deny a student who is transgender access or use of a bathroom or a locker room on the basis of their being transgender is in fact a violation of Title IX. That is, by the way, and we could probably talk about this more, it is the very same ruling that they issued, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals issued in the Gavin Grimm case, which is set to go up to the Supreme Court of the United States later on this year, or later on this month, as a matter of fact. And so The notion simply is that Title IX is there to protect people on the basis of their gender. When people are discriminated against because they're transgender on the basis of their gender, that's a violation of Title IX.
Wonderful. So, well, not wonderful that there'd be discrimination,
No.
but thank you for that. That was very in-depth, and I appreciate that. So, like we were just saying, the Trump administration had removed the Department of Education's guidance on it.
Right.
Moving forward, what are we going to start seeing, do you think?
Yeah. So we should go back a little bit on this. After the District 211 ruling, actually in November of 2015, there were lots of questions from school districts across the country about what their obligations were under Title IX. And many of those school districts asked the Department of Education and the Department of Justice to give them some guidance on what they were required to do, whether or not they were required under Title IX to offer the use of gender-appropriate restrooms and locker rooms to students who were transgender when they requested them. The Department of Education, the Department of Justice worked together, and they issued that guidance in May of 2016. And one of the things that's important to remember is that this was just guidance.
Right.
This is how this should work. This is the way that we're interpreting the law. And in addition to that, they actually gave a substantial number of best practices. Because one of the things that we should remember is that while it becomes a controversy in many schools when this issue arises and when some parent group shows up to protest because a transgender student is using the appropriate restroom or locker room, that one of the things that's really important to remember is there are hundreds and thousands of school districts across Illinois and across the country who have implemented these programs without a single bit of controversy. In fact, there's never been a single instance of a transgender student causing a problem in a locker room or restroom that's consistent with their gender identity. In fact, the only thing that's happened is that those transgender students have often been targeted even when they're using the appropriate locker room or restroom. And so the Obama administration issued this guidance. They sent it out across the country. It was challenged by a group of people down in Texas. And then when the Trump administration came in within the first few weeks of this new administration, they withdrew the guidance. But there's a very important point to underscore here. The Obama guidance did not make any law. It did not create any law. It did not change any law. And in the same way, the Trump administration's withdrawal of the guidance does not create any new law. It does not change any law. Title IX still covers transgender students in the same ways that it did on January 20th in the morning. And quite frankly, as I've been fond of saying in the media of late, if any school district in the state of Illinois changes its policies with regards to transgender students on the basis that they are in fact following the Trump guidance, we'll sue them because Title IX still means what it means.
I think that's a fantastic point. I think everything...
The will sue them part?
Well, definitely. I'm not arguing against that, that's for sure. But I think that all the things that you're noting is so important. I think that a lot of people have had a lot of questions about what does it mean, and the letter of the law still stands, and I think that's important to emphasize.
Right.
So we do have a caller, and I'm ready to take that. Hello.
Yes, good evening. Mr. Yohnka, instead of all these expensive lawsuits and litigation regarding these issues, wouldn't it be more cost effective in any of these schools simply to have maybe two smaller washrooms installed, one for boys who identify as girls, one for girls who identify as boys, and then who could be harmed with something like that? They come up with porta potties for people to go outside, and again, all these bathroom issues. It just seems silly after a point in time how much money and time get devoted to this stuff, and you can't trash Trump, you can't trash Clinton, It's like solve the problem. So again, why not just install, again, a smaller, two small washrooms at each one of these places, again, for boys who think they're girls, girls who think they're boys, then you'd eliminate the parent problem. Everybody would say everybody came to a happy conclusion on this. So I'll get off the line, and I'd like to hear your answer.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. So let me just correct one thing, that one premise of the question. This isn't about girls who think they're boys or boys who think they're girls. These are about girls and boys. One of the things is that we know is that gender is determined by a whole series of factors, and that often have very little to do with anatomy. And in fact, that's the single factor on which gender is often based when someone's born. Here's the problem with the solution of having a separate, and forgive me for being flippant, having a separate but equal place for people to go. It's not equal. In fact, what you do is you segregate the transgender student. You send them to a place where they are outing and identifying themselves as being transgender, where they are forced to go in that instance in order to use the restroom, and in fact, opening them up often to increased risk. One of the students across the state of Illinois that the ACLU has represented is a young man named Alex Macrae, who's from a small town, a small school district, I should say, Williamsville, Sherman, down near Springfield.
I remember it,
Yeah,
yes.
and so Alex, transitioned as a freshman in high school, approached his administration about using the appropriate restroom and locker room. They denied him that, and they sent him to a separate single facility that was, they said out of the way and would be private. Well, what it ended up doing is every time Alex wanted to go use the restroom, or every time Alex wanted to go change for gym class, everybody in the school knew that that was the transgender bathroom, because it was segregated, it was out of the way, and there's a real harm that comes from outing a child in that way and forcing them to behave differently than their peers. I think the other thing about all of this, and we just have to be upfront about this, is, for example, in District 211, where the issue was locker rooms and not bathrooms, the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights did a nearly year-long study of the situation in that particular district, and one of the things that they discovered and reported is that nobody actually disrobes in the locker room completely. It turns out that the locker rooms today in a high school for young women and girls don't look like 1970s prison movies. And if some of you are as old as me, you'll actually get that reference. But the fact of the matter is that's not what's happening in locker rooms. And so one of the realities is, to go to the caller's point, is that students, a vast majority of students, do not view this as being a problem. They have no issue with having a transgender student in their locker room or in their restroom. What I would say is that if there are students who are uncomfortable as the result of that, then quite candidly, we should have single-use facilities for those students to go and use if they're uncomfortable. What we shouldn't do, and we should let them have the option of doing that, but what we shouldn't do is force students simply on the basis of being transgender to be the ones who have to use it.
So I have another question as well. The ACLU has a lot on its hands right now. There's a lot going on through the administration. What do advocates and lawmakers, what can they do right now to ensure that Title IX still applies to transgenders, transgender students, and what can we as advocates start doing now?
Right. So there's really a couple of things that I think as advocates we ought to be focused on. The first is the upcoming Supreme Court case I mentioned involving Gavin Grimm, which is an ACLU case out of Virginia that's going it's Gloucester County versus Grimm that's going up to the Supreme Court within a few weeks. And that case really directly asks this question about Title IX and how Title IX applies to a case of a young man attempting to use the restroom that conforms to his gender identity. So I think to watch that case, I think to be supportive of Gavin's position. I'm happy to say that in the instance of there were just amicus briefs filed in that case yesterday, and in that particular instance, there are 9 members of the Illinois congressional delegation who signed on supporting Gavin's position. It's really a remarkable showing of strength, including both of our United States senators who were among the early signees onto the amicus brief in support of Gavin's position. So that's the first thing, and I think that's one thing that we can do. I think on the local level, there are a couple of other things that I would say. The first is, and I realize that this program is part of this, but the first thing is that people really need to learn more about what it means to be transgender and how we support transgender students. It turns out that one of the great ways we support transgender students is by treating them with dignity and humanity in every aspect of school and helping them to integrate and live their authentic lives as fully as possible. And that means allowing them to use the restroom and the locker room that is consistent with their gender identity. So, just knowing about that, looking around, the chances are in your school, maybe in your child's school, in your grandchild's school, there is likely a student who is transgender, and your child and your grandchild can probably tell you stories about how important it is to make that child feel welcome, to make them feel included. Just to learn about that is a really important thing. The second thing is that if you're CPS has adopted a fully inclusive policy, but one of the things that we all need to do is to make sure it's actually being implemented at the school level in every building that CPS operates and controls. And as a local advocate, you can ask those questions of the school principal and the school officials and make sure that policies are being not only adopted, but frankly are being implemented in a fair and inclusive way. And the last thing, of course, is that all of us can be, talking to our friends and neighbors and others, who live in other parts of the state of Illinois and who live in other parts of the country to talk about the need to include, to be inclusive. I have to say that one of the great things is that here in Illinois, we actually have the 4 largest school districts all have inclusive policies and have really done a good job of standing up and standing out, speaking out rather for their students who are transgender and including them at all levels. But we need to do better and we need to do more. And frankly, there are many of those policies that could use an update, that could use a refresher, and really could afford to be updated in a fashion that's even more inclusive and even more recognizes the humanity of these students in a greater way. I've gone on a long time, but I just have to say, these are children. Yeah. We forget sometimes in these debates. We're not talking about some adult who's trying to make trouble. We're talking about a child who's trying to get through school. And if we can't be human, and if we can't be respectful, and if we can't be accommodating of that student, then, I don't know really where we are as a society.
And I think that's a fantastic point that you make. These are children. And I think that as all these new things come through the administration or we're bogged down with politics, I think sometimes we think it's easier to just set that aside, not educate ourselves, and kind of remove ourselves from the conversation. But these are children's lives, and these are people's lives, and it is important for us to be educated and stay ever vigilant to it. And on that note, I also want to thank the Illinois delegation who did sign on. I saw that actually this week when I was in D.C., and I was very excited to see that. So thank you for that, and keep up the great work. One thing you did note, though, is Gavin's Gavin Grimm's case. I've been hearing a lot about that, and there is a lot of concern that now with this guidance rescinded, that will change the dynamic of this case. Can you speak to that a little bit without giving away too much? But
Sure. I won't make the oral argument here. I promise you that.
Great. We've only got 5 more minutes.
Right. So what the Grimm case really is about is this interpretation of Title IX.
Okay.
And whether or not Title IX, which was meant to bar gender discrimination, includes gender discrimination based on a student being transgender. That is really the issue before the court. The guidance, one of the things is that the guidance only comes in to the extent that the Fourth Circuit, which heard the Grimm case, said that the Obama administration's interpretation of Title IX, which was not then part of this guidance at all, that their interpretation of Title IX was in fact reasonable and justified. Those were the words that the court used. And so what the Supreme Court is going to have to do in this instance is to suggest that that not only did the Fourth Circuit get that wrong, but that interpretation from the Obama administration had been wrong. I think given these developments of the last few days, we anticipate that the Trump administration will take an alternative position now. Some might say they will use alternative facts, and they will figure out, they will now argue that Title IX was never intended to cover this. But if gender discrimination means gender discrimination, then it has to mean that for every student, including students who are transgender.
I completely agree with you. Yeah. Moving forward, what do you think we can see from the Trump administration, or what should we be looking for?
I think in this entire area, there's a couple of things. So let's presume, because I think this is a good thing to presume, that the Supreme Court rules in favor of Gavin Grimm. And they suggest that Title IX does, in fact, protect students who are transgender. I think one of the things that we'll then have to be worried about in terms of the administration is how do they enforce that? The Obama administration's Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education was very vigorous in the way they defended this across the country. They did it right here, as I said, in District 211. So the question will be, what does the Trump administration do in terms of enforcement, and how does that reflect on in situations going forward in, maybe not in Illinois, but in Indiana or Kentucky or Texas, where a school district just says, we don't like what the Supreme Court said, we're just not going to follow it. And if there is no enforcement from the Department of Education or the Department of Justice, then it means that every student who finds themselves in that circumstance will have to bring litigation. I think there are going to be lots of us who are going to look for that as something we're going to want to do. I think we're going to want to try to enforce this everywhere we can, but we're not really going to have a willing partner from the administration, and I think that's the thing that will really be a shame.
Well, the ACLU has definitely had its hands full the last few weeks, and I don't imagine that will stop anytime soon.
I don't think so.
We are about to start wrapping up now, but I want to quickly take note about our website really quickly. So this is our website, prideactiontank.org. You can also view the website, who we are, how to stay informed, and donate. And I think now more than ever, it's so important to stay informed, so please sign up. You can also contact us right here. Enter your information, you'll be added to our mailing list, and if you let us know what you'd like to be involved with, we can definitely coordinate and help with that. And Ed, I was wondering if you had any last points. We have a few moments to wrap up here. I know you're busy, and I know you have a lot of things to get to.
I'll just say this. One of the things on the night that the administration withdrew the guidance was, I had been out speaking throughout the day and talking to people, talking to media about this. And then I went home, and late at night I had an email from the parent of a 10-year-old transgender child. And the parent said to me, I understand it's not going to make a difference in the law. I understand it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change our school's policy. but what do I say to my child tonight? And you know, it's the hardest thing to say that your government says you're not worth protecting. And all I will say, as I said to her, is you can tell your child that we'll still be there to protect her, and so will our friends and our allies across this movement. And I think that's what we have to draw from, and we have to continue to work together on this.
Well, Ed, I know on behalf of Pride Action Tank and AIDS Foundation of Chicago, we are very much looking forward to working with you and being an advocate with you as well as we move forward. And it is important to note that even though the guidance was rescinded, the letter of the law still holds today, and that is not taken away. So thank you once again. My name is Alaina Kennedy, and we have
Ed Yohnka.
And thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye.